Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Massive Action Sydney. Hello to everybody who's joining us here in the Clancy, and hello as well to everybody who's joining the Teams live stream wherever you are in the world. For us here in Clancy, we are joining a meeting this morning, on the traditional lands of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd just like to take a moment on this beautiful early spring day to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of these lands, to pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining this event today. My name's Claire Annesley, and I am the Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture here at UNSW. UNSW ADA has a vision that through creativity, collaboration and inclusion, we seek and solve problems to improve life on Earth. This time last year, ADA launched its strategy, ADA 2051, which sets out what we will do to achieve, to reach that vision, to improve life on Earth. As a faculty, we're committed to listening to and learning from Indigenous knowledges, advancing and further strengthening the diverse discipline base of our faculty, becoming great problem solvers, and then making sure that we use the innovations that we drive to drive purposeful change, to improve life on Earth. ADA 2051 is a 30-year strategy because the big and complex problems we need to solve, the climate emergency, health inequalities, enormous inequities of power, knowledge, and wealth, they all need sustained, long-term commitment from us to drive that change. So it's a 30-year strategy, but we also know that these are urgent and complex problems and that we need to start solving them right now. To get us going, in 2021, we established the ADA Innovation Hub, which is our problem-solving space, way of thinking, and state of mind. It's led by Dr. Carly Vickers, and it works by curating interdisciplinary teams of staff and students and external partners to solve urgent and complex, knotty problems. Massive Action Sydney, the collaboration we're launching today, is our biggest and most ambitious collaboration yet. Massive Action Sydney brings UNSW Arts, Design and Architecture together with Bruce Mao and Beezy Williams and their Massive Change Network. Bruce is a Canadian, Chicago-based visionary designer who, across 40 years of design practice, has collaborated with global brands, universities, leading cultural organizations, heads of states, renowned architects, and fellow optimists across the globe on an impressive range of projects. Folks, Bruce was given the commission to redesign Mecca. Together with his life partner, Beezy Williams, also a gifted strategist and communicator, they founded Massive Change Network. Their mission is to design change at scale, massive change. And Mao's 24 principles of massive change, set out in the incredible book MC24, is the methodology or route map for doing this. I first reached out to Bruce around about the time that we launched ADA 2051. Bruce had very generously delivered a guest lecture over Zoom for my colleague Emma Mills and her design students that year. And Emma invited me to join. It made a very, very big impression on me. Bruce's work and thinking is clear, ambitious, optimistic, inspirational. He deals with very complex problems, but gives you some clarity about how we can go about solving them. Bruce and I chatted for a little while about him coming to Sydney for a residency. And then, in a Zoom call at the start of this year, in February, I think it was, he said something like, and I paraphrase, Bruce, these are not your exact words, how would it be if we collaborated on a project? How would it be, what would happen if ADA and the Massive Change Network got together and co-created something that would mobilize the massive action that's needed to drive massive change, to improve life on Earth? And in a heartbeat, I said yes. And so, between February and September of this year, over fortnightly Zoom meetings, spanning multiple continents, multiple time zones, we brought Massive Action Sydney to life. And this September, Bruce and Beezy are with us for a series of activities and events and keynotes and performances to co-create a toolkit for massive action. The project, just to give you a little bit of insight, is organised as 5 interdisciplinary teams of staff and students. The teams are power, health, climate, acceleration and translation. And alongside the acceleration and translation teams, a First Nations team will work across the whole project, ensuring that First Nations perspectives and knowledge are integrated into all our discussions and outcomes. To date, as of today, over 100 faculty staff and divisional staff, undergraduate students, postgraduate students, and PhD students have been involved in the project that we're launching today. And on top of that, an additional 50 students and leaders from across UNSW have been involved through discovery interviews to help the Massive Change Network understand UNSW in a more holistic way. So in a very, very short space of time, an idea became a project, and a new group of people, a new combination of people, has developed into a strong, creative, collaborative, and inclusive team that I'm very proud to be part of. There's a few people that I would just like to take a moment to thank. From the ADA side of this incredible team, I would like to thank Carly Vickers. Who is the person coordinating so much complexity and detail and vision. I'd like to thank Michaela and Ragaya from the Innovation Hub team. Tria and Emma, and the other Emma. And I'd also like to thank our Faculty Executive Director, David Kami. On the Massive Change Network side, I'd like to thank Gretchen Gescheidel, who is here with us in Sydney as well. Gretchen. Where's Gretchen? Wherever you are. And also Beatrice, Francis, David, MC, Jessica, and Alan. But mostly, of course, I would like to thank Bruce and Beezy. It is such an honour for us in UNSW ADA to be collaborating with you on Massive Action Sydney. It's a big, optimistic, ambitious project. It's exactly how we like things in ADA, and we cannot wait to see what happens working with you over the coming few weeks. You can all follow along over the next month by using the hashtag #MassiveActionSydney across social media. And at the end of the month, we invite you all to come down to see the showcase at the Centre for Massive Action, which we have set up on our Paddington campus for the month. Beezy, I would now like to hand over to you to take the proceedings from here. Thank you very much.
Catch my breath. Claire, thank you. And got a second. There. I'm going to start with thank you again. I think it's always great to start with gratitude. And Dean Annesley, thank you so much. And I can say it's an honor to be here. And Bruce and I would like to share our heartfelt thanks to you, so very many wonderful people and individuals who made this opportunity to collaborate a reality. And it really takes a village, you know, from our dedicated team of 15 people in our studio in Toronto to the countless others here at UNSW. I am grateful for so many of the hands and hearts devoted to this amazing month ahead. It's really great to be back in Australia. In many ways, this is where massive change began. Our love of Australia started more than 20 years ago in Perth. We were invited to the Australian Centre for Design by Linda Dorrington, the executive director of a nonprofit cultural organization called Forum. She held a conference with designers and engineers from all around the world. And the goal was to reimagine the future of Perth by bringing light to the role that design can play in transforming an economy, creating new opportunities from shifting the economy from an extraction economy to a maker economy. That was a watershed moment for Perth and for our own design practice. From Perth, we were called to Brisbane to continue the conversation about designing the economy to create opportunity. In Brisbane, we led our first design learning workshop, 24 hours to massive change. And let me tell you, it was ambitious. 4 days of immersive experience curriculum dedicated to solving the real-world challenges facing Brisbane. We figured we could teach one massive change design principle per hour, but there's 24 principles. That meant covering them all in 4 days. And that was overly ambitious. Actually, it was insane. People cried, I cried, Bruce cried, we all cried. But it worked out okay. We worked around the clock, and we didn't give up. And together, we reimagined a new future for the state. And we learned a lot in those days, and I can assure you that over 10 years, we've taken the edge off of how we conduct our workshops. I promise there won't be so many tears this time. But now it's a decade later, and we're thrilled to be back in Australia, and we're thrilled to be here at UNSW. And we began with massive change, and now we're honored to introduce massive action to Australia. So our relationship with UNSW began about a year ago, as Claire had said, when Professor Emma Mills asked Bruce if he would talk to her students about MC24. That went over so well, and word spread across the school, and soon we were having conversations about how we could share this thinking across the university, which led to an invitation for us to be visiting professors for the month of September. Then we continued to get to know each other, and when the ADA Innovation Hub presented a screening of the film Mao, a documentary about Bruce's life and our work, we figured that we had a bond and that we were ready to rock and roll. So it's so exciting that our work aligns with the ADA 2051 mission to seek and solve problems, to solve and improve life on Earth. You'll hear all about what's in store for our collaboration, but first, I am delighted to introduce to you Bruce, to take you on our journey from massive change to massive action. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bruce Mau.
Thank you. Thank you, VC. And thank you again, Claire and Carly and everyone. The effort and the hospitality have been really unbelievable. When we heard this idea, seek and solve problems to improve life on Earth, it was kind of like you had us at Life on Earth. The whole idea of life on Earth, it's actually not human life on Earth, it's life on Earth. It's really, for me, that was really the idea. And so what I want to focus on is a kind of journey to what we call life-centered design, sort of how that has evolved and sort of how we got there and what we hope to do with Massive Action and our collaboration and really what the opportunity is. Because I think the opportunity is absolutely extraordinary. I've been, maybe the most fortunate designer of the last half century. And this is really maybe the most exciting opportunity that I've encountered. I mean, to have the opportunity to work with the caliber of people that we will be working with over the next month, to explore the kind of ambition that we're talking about here, it's just just doesn't come along very often. So this is me getting started. I grew up on a farm outside of a mining town in northern Canada, about 6 hours north of Toronto. It was an extreme northern climate, minus 40 degrees for weeks on end during the wintertime. And our house was the last farm on the road, the last farm on the left. So you can see there. I didn't really understand just how remote it was until I went back and Googled it and discovered, wow, it really was the end of the road in more ways than one. Behind our house was, hundreds of miles of land with, no occupation. And our house was built on a kind of rocky hill, which meant that during the winter months, we couldn't get running water into the house. So my job as a young man was to go to the well in the valley and provide water to the household for a family of 7. And I would go every day with a snowmobile and take water bucket by bucket from the well and bring it into the house every morning before I went to school. When I was growing up, it wasn't something that I really talked about. It frankly was embarrassing for me. Everyone else I knew had running water, and I didn't really think of it as something that I wanted to share very much. And I didn't, when I went away to go to school, I didn't think of it as relevant to my life, outside. And as I became a designer, I didn't think of it as part of that. And it was a long time before I realized, actually, that experience is really profoundly important to what I do and the way that I think, and my life as a designer, because that experience is something that I share with about 1 billion people. Still, about 1 billion people don't have access to running water, to clean water, and I understand what it takes to do it. the work that it takes, the weight of water for a family, and the approach to water is very different when you have to lift it. And I find it absolutely magical still today to turn on a tap. It's one of the reasons I'm so optimistic. Every day I turn on the tap, I was like, wow, that's awesome. So I went to school. I couldn't get into art school. I decided kind of at the last minute that I wanted to do that. I couldn't get in because I was really focused on science and math, and I decided at the last minute to go to art school. So I had to stay an extra year in high school. But I did eventually get in. I fell in love with, I discovered putting words and images together, and that turns out to be graphic design. And I just fell in love with it. I love the idea of what happens when two things come together and make a third, and what that third thing could be. And that became a kind of real obsession and passion and creative practice for me, and it really was a kind of foundation of everything that I do. My first company that I started was a company called Public Good, and it really came out of the fact that I was working on things that I didn't really believe were good. I felt like I was building a prison that I was going to have to live in. And I didn't want all of my energy, all the work that I was doing, which I loved working. I loved working a lot, and I worked all the time. And I didn't want all that energy to go to something that I didn't think was good. I mean, it's very much like improving life on Earth. And so I started a little company with two partners called Public Good. The idea is very simple. Let's just work on things that make the world a better place. It wasn't more sophisticated politically than that. And a project came along called Zone Books. They didn't want to do it. They didn't see that as public good. I did. So I said, look, I'm going to do it. I started my own studio. And I started a collaboration with a man named Sanford Quinter, who is still my intellectual partner. It's now, I think next year it will be 40 years that we work together. And it started this kind of investigation of ideas. And Sanford was the one who really made me an author as a designer. He said, design is actually authorship. And he put my name on the spine of that first book. And the first book was on the contemporary city. It was really about trying to make a thing that behaved like a city. It wasn't an illustration, it was a model. And the idea was to actually make a thing, make an object, that when you held it in your hand, it felt like you were holding a city. And when you experienced it, you experienced the city. And that was a kind of quite new thing in the way that people were thinking about design. It started a project that lasted over 20 years, and I've now designed about 260 books over the years. It's been a kind of central part of my practice. One of the other most important books that we did together was called Incorporations. And this is going to be, I think, a really important discussion, I think, in our work together. Incorporations is simply the idea that the idea of a discrete entity is not really plausible. The idea that you can have an object is not really plausible. An object is, in fact, incorporating flows of energy and matter into itself. So a thing is actually a kind of moment in a flow of matter and energy, and is itself incorporated into higher level flows of matter and energy. So you are a body. That body is actually a flow of matter and energy. You have more cells in you that are not human than human cells, just to give you a sense of that. So most of you is not human, even though you're constituted as a human. And you are human in a sense as an object, but you are incorporated into bigger flows and of energy and matter. You're a family, you're a community, you're a society, you're a country, you're part of the living world. And so that idea of incorporations becomes really central to thinking about a life-centered design, methodology. And it really changed for me. I didn't really understand it at the time how important it would be. It was another project and we did it. But it's one of those things that has very, very long resonant wavelengths. I have been extremely fortunate in my practice to have really exceptional mentors, including Frank Gehry. I worked very closely with him for 15 years or so. Worked on projects like the Walt Disney Concert Hall and the world's first Museum of Biodiversity. And Frank was really important to me, not only as a designer, but also as a person. He was a kind of mentor in helping me kind of understand how to sustain a creative practice. And so we had, really exceptional projects. My practice grew from a graphic design practice to really thinking holistically about all kinds of things. We helped Moma move into their new digs, and I was actually commissioned to redesign the Moma identity, and I told them they shouldn't, which is, I got an article in the New York Times about something I didn't do. Which is I told them not to do it. I said, look, it's the best thing in the world. I could, of course, redesign it. I'd love to, but it would be kind of stupid. So, and it really isn't a problem that needs solving. And Sanford recently pointed out how important that insight was to what we need to do. That we ought to be thinking about what are the real problems. So when you say life on Earth, that's a problem. The logo for Moma, not so much. Let's move on and find the real things that we ought to be working on and really spending our time focusing on. I became an author mostly because I was really interested in trying to understand where's the best place that we can contribute? What can we contribute, and where are the best places to do that? And so I was doing research to do that. To research, I had to write things down. In the process, I became an author. I never thought of myself as one, but slowly it happened. One of the first things I wrote was this text called the Incomplete Manifesto for Growth. And it really was a kind of, it wasn't a manifesto in the kind of heavy political sense, but in a kind of light sense, even more deeply, in the sense that it was, trying to understand how do we sustain a creative life, not for a season. It's kind of easy to be a hot designer for a season, but it's a whole other matter to sustain a creative life in the market, as you age, as you have a career, as all the kind of forces that you're working with. Trying to make a living, trying to sustain a practice, and that's really what it was all about. And it kind of had a life of its own. It's been reproduced in dozens of languages, and it sort of started my process of becoming a writer. Over the years, I've published several books on what we now think of as context projects. They're really projects that try to map out the changing context of design. What's happening in the world around us, and what does that new kind of territory look like, and what does that represent as an opportunity for designers? How could we kind of respond and produce in that context? And those projects really kind of changed, in many ways, really changed our lives. One of those was a project with Rem Koolhaas, a Dutch architect, and it was a project really it was a kind of documentary project on the practice of architecture and what it means to dig a hole in the ground and change the world. And the reality of that practice, not the kind of pristine, kind of, sanitized version that you see often in published work, but the reality of what really happens when you try to do that. And it really changed the kind of publishing of architecture. That led to projects to really rethink things in a lot of different ways, including the library system of Seattle to kind of reconceive, what does it mean to make a library, a new library system in the home of Microsoft. When you can have infinite amount of information in a infinitesimal space, why are we building a library? And what's the kind of social program of the library? And that more and more became our work. It was really working on the program of things. What are we, not only what we look like, but what are we doing? How do we design what we do to tell the story that we want to be? And that really became our work. For me, one of the most important projects that we've been involved in is our collaboration with Arizona State University and a man named Michael Crow, who's the president there. And Michael saw what we were doing. We started a little school called the Institute Without Boundaries, and it was purpose-driven, entrepreneurial, experience-based learning. And he invited me down to ASU to give a lecture about that. He invited me to his office. He said, "Tell me about this thing. How many students you got?" I said, "I got 12 students. It's purpose-driven. It's all about driving learning with purpose." And he said, "Well, we're going to do that with 65,000 students." And I was like, "Wow, I have no idea how to do that." And he said, "We're going to go to 90,000. We're going to build the biggest campus in America." I said, "That sounds great." And a couple of months later, I got a call, and they said, "Michael wants you to raise $1 billion." And I said, "I think you have the wrong number, because I have no idea how to do that. I've never raised a penny." And they said, "Well, Mr. Crow, President Crow would like you to do it. So could you please tell us, what you think about that?" And I said, "Look, I'll write you a letter. If it makes sense, we can proceed, and otherwise, you can go and find somebody who actually knows what they're doing." And so I wrote him a letter, and I said, "Look, if I was going to do this, Michael has written a manifesto for the new American university. If you really believe in him, and you believe that manifesto, he says there's no longer a trade-off. We should not have a trade-off between access and excellence. If that's true, we should organize the university around purpose, because purpose is the driver of learning that nothing else can match. And what happens with purpose is that people become entrepreneurial learners, and they will break the box to learn. They will push people out of the way to get at the right stuff. And if we did that, I think we could really inspire a generation. We could inspire donors. We could inspire students, staff, faculty, parents, even government people." And so they said, "Well, that's kind of what we were hoping for. So let's proceed." So we did it took us about 1.5 years to do the project. It's called The Challenges Ahead. And we launched it at ASU just as the financial collapse happened. And it was wildly successful. Our mandate was to raise $1 billion, as I said. We raised $10 billion. And completely reorganized the university around purpose. So in the classical domains, in the classical approach, you have a Department of Astronomy. They now have a Department of Space Travel, because kids want to go to space. And when you want to go to space, you're going to learn astronomy like your life depends on it, because it does. And that's really what happened. And it really has been, it's been an extraordinary, we were just invited back actually a few weeks ago to see the impact. It's been now 14 years. When we started, they were 65,000 students. They just started again this year, they are 180,000 students. When we started, they were the #1 party school in America. And they've now been the #1 school for innovation for the last 7 years, beating both MIT and Stanford. And it's been a total transformation. We worked with the Jets and the Giants to design their new stadium. And as Claire said, we were commissioned to redesign Mecca. because Mecca has a real challenge. As you can see, there's practically no design. It was just totally haphazard, and they create a situation where when you put, several million pilgrims into it, the flow of people is so dangerous that people get crushed. And a few years ago, the year before we did this, they had 800 people get crushed in a terrible accident. And so they commissioned us to say, look, we need a new vision for the city. Now, if you had come to me at the well and said, Bruce, you really should pay attention because you're going to have to design Mecca, I would have said, you're cracked, that's not going to happen. But that is what happened, and they wanted a 10-year plan. And we said, look, we're going to, it's Mecca after all. Let's design a 1,000-year plan. Because if we design a 1,000-year plan, we'll have to do it as an open platform. We can't possibly know what is going to happen. And we'll have to build an open platform that will accept innovation and will accept unforeseen developments over time. And that's the best possible thing that we can do. Now, along the way, we did a project called Massive Change, and the back cover kind of says it best. It's not about the design, the world of design. It's about the design of the world. It's about really our capacity to shape the world. And what we saw, what I found really kind of irritating at the time, was that even in the creative fields, people were getting quite negative. That, I had friends who were doing, having incredible work, incredible lives, doing incredible things, but somehow they were becoming cynical and negative. And they felt like, like somehow, things were terrible. And I found this beautiful quotation by Arnold Toynbee, who said that in the long sweep of history, the 20th century wouldn't be remembered for technology and innovation or for violence and conflict. And he was a British historian who wrote a 20-volume history of the world. And he said this in 1957, so he would have just lived through the worst killing in human history, 70 million people killed by an extraordinary flourishing of technology. But he says, no, it's not technology and innovation, it's not violence and conflict. Instead, it's an era in which we dared to imagine the welfare of the entire human race as a practical objective. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that's the biggest idea I've ever heard. That's what we're committed to. That's why I'm a designer. That's what public good is about. That's what we do every day. We might not frame it in that kind of grand way. It's too big an idea. But that's what I think most designers are, that's why they became designers. And so we said, look, let's figure out, that was 57, it was almost 50 years later, let's figure out if this is happening, then we should be able to see the evidence. And so we organized the project around what we call design economies, the regions of your lives that are being transformed by these new capacities. We want to see, is it true? Is it like it should be easy to see? What we found that was so amazing was that it was so radically true that it's really weird and disturbing that we don't think it is, that we're not aware of it, that we don't realize what we're accomplishing. And so we established a school, as I mentioned, called the Institute Without Boundaries. And we did a project that launched in Vancouver, went to Toronto and Chicago. We broke attendance records in museums. We beat Warhol and Picasso. We designed a kind of immersive experience for the whole show. It was all about these design economies and how we're kind of changing your life and kind of developing whole new capacity. So this is the image economy, and it's designed as if it's like a diagram of the electromagnetic spectrum. So you could walk in there, and the images that you see in color are what you see with your naked eye. All the other images are produced by other wavelengths. So we've taken the spectrum of the universe, and we've turned it into an eyeball. Right, so we've made the whole universe an eyeball that we can actually look at the universe and make better decisions with. We looked at the market economy. The market isn't a natural place, it's a design place. And what we design, how we design it determines what has value and what gets exchanged. We look at the energy economy. How we think about the energy economy determines practically everything else. And what we realized was that we're actually in the process of redesigning wealth. We're in the process of designing all new kinds of currencies, new forms of wealth, new ways of exchanging wealth. So we still have the wealth of capital, right? So we have the wealth of, the classical forms of wealth, but we have new kinds of wealth, wealth of information, wealth of access, wealth of mobility. We're constantly creating new forms of wealth. So when the show launched in Vancouver, I went to a high school and gave a presentation, kind of like this one, and shared some of the stuff. And I talked about some of the concepts. And after the presentation, a young woman came to the microphone and she said, "Mr. Mao, I think you're not thinking big enough." And I said, "Really? Because not too many people are saying that about me right now." It's quite the opposite. People say I'm a megalomaniac. They think I want to control the world. And I have to explain that no, it's not about control, it's about responsibility. And she said, well, this was right, for Toynbee, he was right about the 20th century. This was in 2006, I think it was. She said, but that was the 20th century. Our project for the 21st century, you should take out the welfare of the whole human race and put in the welfare of all of life. That's our project. And I was just blown away. And I realized, what kind of high school is this, first of all. But she was absolutely right. It was like, wow, what an incredible insight. And it really kind of put us on a track to think differently, to realize she's absolutely right. We had a blind spot. We were kind of thinking from that 1957 perspective. We had to think differently. And what we began to realize is that in the old way, design was a kind of subset of business. Business happened in a cultural context. Culture happened in a natural context. And that was the kind of natural order of things. But what we saw that was actually emerging was that business, culture, and even nature itself were becoming design projects. I remember when I first showed this diagram, people said, "Bruce, you're crazy. You just want to, you want to control everything." And I said, this is not about control, it's about responsibility. Where we fail to design, we design for failure. So if you look at the ecologies around the world, where we fail to design them, we've destroyed them. Right? Where you see the kind of massive occupation of humans, when we've not actually designed that occupation in a way that it was able to support the ecologies that sustain us, we've destroyed them. And now we're going back and trying to redesign them, recover the ecologies that we destroyed. And so now we're in this situation where this is the first paragraph from MC24, that practically everything we do today needs to change. Almost everything we do is not designed for the future. It's not designed for a plausible long-term occupation on Earth of the scale of humans that we are. We still do most things as if we own nature and have unlimited resources. We work as if waste is not a problem. We don't even think of waste as an idea. Right? We can't imagine a life without waste. It's not conceptually possible for us. We treat nature like a pantry and a toilet. Think about what we're doing to the oceans. We expect that we're going to continue to use it as a source of food and as a dumping ground for every problem that we have. We think short-term, party like there's no tomorrow, and pass the check to future generations. We dump problems we can't solve into places we can't see. Out of sight, out of mind is still the operating system that we work with. If we can't see it, it doesn't bother us. So as long as you can get it over the horizon, as long as it's an externality, one of the most kind of problematic concepts ever invented. As long as we can make it an externality, someone else's problem, it doesn't bother me. And many of our solutions create more problems than they correct. That goes back to in corporations. We take a problem out of context to solve it. So we pull a problem out of context and we make it a discrete object as if that was possible. And then we solve it one-to-one, and then we put it back in context, and we are shocked that there are implications and problems that we didn't imagine. And so we have this kind of, this is the place that we are now. And we are really at scale. Right? So this is this is the context that we now find ourselves in. We're now at 7.9 billion. It's going to tick over to 8 billion any second now. And we're on our way to 10 billion by mid-century. You can see that the red line is less developed, the blue, more developed, the blue line is less developed. So most of the growth is in the least developed places on Earth. The more developed is leveling off and even beginning to decline. And we now have a new set of problems. And I like to call them success problems, not failure problems. We don't have the problems of failure. We have the problems of succeeding. And you can see the red line on this graph is population from 1750 to today. If we had failed more frequently, we would have fewer problems. We would be about 1 billion people. But instead, we're 8 billion. And we're 8 billion because we solved so many problems. We designed so many solutions to some of the most vexing problems in history. As part of massive change, we met the people who took smallpox off the face of the earth. Smallpox killed hundreds of millions of people in the last century. That's gone. So those people are now living into their, those people are growing up, consuming, buying cars. They're actually they become part of the success problem. The good news is that we're not going to solve those problems with the tools of the past. This is the work of Ray Kurzweil, and he shows that new capacity is developing at a very predictable rate. Even though it's made of aha moments and eureka discoveries, those eurekas happen like a ticking of a clock. So he can show that when precisely new capacity is coming online, and it is growing exponentially because the capacity is producing capacity. And he shows that by about 2025, we'll put the power of a human brain, processing power, in your pocket for the price of an iPhone. So you have an extra human brain to work with. By 2050, it will have the capacity of all human brains. So imagine what it will mean to be a designer, to be a design thinker, engaged in problem solving, when you have the thinking capacity of all human brains as a device for $1,000, and what the kind of opportunities are. The bad news is that we have real urgent crisis, 10 years to avoid global disaster, according to the IPCC, and the more recent data becomes even more problematic. On top of this, you have the pandemic. In America, we have this lame brain crisis it's hard to describe how we could possibly be doing this. You have the war in the Ukraine, and here you have a really urgent crisis. And something happened, I think, when this happened, that we realized that you go from information to feeling. And information is something that we've known for, Rachel Carson published a book called Silent Spring almost 70 years ago. So we've had the information for 70 years, but we didn't feel it. And in the last few years, people in a lot of different places, San Francisco, people across the West Coast, people are feeling the information. They're feeling the knowledge. And it really fundamentally changes from a neuroscientific standpoint what the message is. And on top of that, you have now here in New South Wales. So we call this a crisis stack. that you have, it's no longer one problem after another in the old ways, where, in America you could have a hurricane and you could, send the forces to deal with the hurricane. But at the same time, you're having wildfires, tornadoes, earthquakes, an insurrection, and you have this kind of a crisis of racial justice, food insecurity crisis, a democracy crisis, etc. And they're stacking up on top of each other. And you get this kind of new condition where they are interconnected, there are feedback loops in the system that are accelerating the impacts. So you have a whole new kind of level of problem. However, as designers, we don't have the luxury of cynicism. We cannot simply say, things are bad all over. We need massive action. We have to find the optimism. We have to bring solutions. Our responsibility, I have a lot of friends who are protesters and cynics, and I accept that they are part of an ecosystem of change. They're not designers. As a designer, we can't accept that. I have to bring what it takes to get to a better future for all of life. That's my responsibility. That's our responsibility as designers. And so with a new level of complex and urgent challenge, we can't solve our problems in the old way. We can't expect that just doing the same old things is going to get to new results, in fact, with the techniques that actually produce the problems in the first place. And so we have to have new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing opportunity. And for me, that actually turning problems to opportunity is a big part of what we do. It's actually, in some ways, the most important thing that we do. And as designers, we have responsibility to bring the optimism. And that is a really challenging, there are days when you wake up and you think, wow, it's going to be really hard to do that today. And, but that is our job. And contrary to the naysayers, the Malthusians, and the cynics, you have to remember, I like to say that if we published a newspaper called Reality, it would be a mile thick. The first quarter inch is the New York Times, and it scares the living daylights out of you. And you want to close your border and close your doors and lock them, and you just want to protect yourself and hoard and do what you can while you can get what you can while you can still get it. But the rest of the mile is massive change. The rest of the mile is collaboration. The rest of the mile is people doing what we're doing today. Think about all the people going to universities all over the world, learning, preparing themselves for a new world, contributing. All the collaboration across languages and cultures and religions, all of that work, that's what's really happening. But that's never going to hit the front page of the paper. So we have to do work ourselves to, first of all, understand it ourselves, and then to communicate it to others so that really people see it. And there's an extraordinary project called Our World in Data. This is the work of Max Roser. And he shows over the last 200 years what has actually happened. So this is 200 years, the world represented by 100 people. And these are probably the 6 most important metrics that we could have: extreme poverty, basic education, literacy, birth rate, etc. Child mortality. And what you see is really quite extraordinary, that infant mortality in 1820, more or less half of your kids died, like before 5. Now it's a tiny fraction, right? 4 die before they're 5 years old. 4 out of 100. Now, of course, 4 is still way too many. And there are millions of people working on getting that number to 0. Right? So that it's probably never going to get to 0. We're going to keep pushing. Asymptotal. It'll never hit 0, but we'll get it as close as we possibly can. And that's what's really going on. And you have these kind of positive inversions in every one of those data points, right? Where 200 years ago, only 6 out of 100 did not live in extreme poverty. Only 6 did not. I mean, when I saw these, I was shocked, because most of us have this incredible talent for projecting our own experience both forward and backward. That it's basically always been kind of like this, and it always will be kind of like this. But it hasn't, actually. Like this is a very special moment in time that it's never happened before in history. It's the most amazing time to be alive and working. And I want to tell you a story about my hometown. Where I grew up, the pollution was so extreme that there was a 30-mile chemical desert around the entire city, around the entire town. So for 30 miles in every direction, there was no vegetation whatsoever, not a blade of grass grew. We lived outside of that in the forest, but every day I took the bus into town through this chemical desert, through what we call the dead zone, and it was just black and dust. And when NASA wanted to train their astronauts to drive on the moon, they brought them to my hometown because it was the closest thing on Earth to the surface of the moon. And I remember as a kid, I'd take the bus and I would see these guys planting stuff in the desert and everything dying every year. And I thought, wow, these are like the losingest farmers on Earth. Like, who are these guys? It turned out they were led by there were 2 scientists, and what they were trying to figure out is what it would take to recover the ecology. And they did that. They actually, this is Jane Goodall and the Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, planting the 10 millionth tree. Over the course of those years, the 2 scientists, I'm now working with them, the 2 scientists, John Gunn and David Pearson, did a project. They figured out what it would take. They proceeded to actually plant 10 million trees and recover that forest. Jane Goodall went up and actually wrote a story about how incredible this project was to recover the ecology of this 30-mile dead zone. And they sent me this graph. They just did it a couple weeks ago. And they said, this is what happened during your lifetime. So I was born in 59. In 1959, in my hometown of Sudbury, a mining town, we produced over 2,500 kilotons of sulfur dioxide. And you can see that black line is the sulfur dioxide pumped into the atmosphere over those years. So during that time, nickel production went up, but they developed all kinds of technologies to take that sulfur dioxide out of the process so that it became, it's now almost zero. Right? And at the same time, they planted 10 million trees and recovered the ecology of the region. And they actually kept a park of devastation. So they kept this kind of place there so future generations will be able to see what actually happened. So that really brought us to what we call life-centered design. When we put life and not humans at the center, we can begin to solve our problems in context and incorporate the ecosystems that sustain us. We can accelerate positive change. And I'm teaching at a university there in my hometown. I've been on the board for several years, and it's a tricultural project. It's very similar in spirit to what we're doing here in our collaboration with Indigenous people. In that case, every studio has an Indigenous elder as part of the studio. And this is one of the studios that they do. They go into the forest and they build a birch bark canoe in the way that it's been done for thousands of years with an Indigenous elder. And that birch bark canoe is done in a way, in a way that they've always done it. If it's broken or it wears out, they simply bring it back to the forest and it becomes food for the next generation of life. It has a kind of perfectly cyclical behavior. And what I learned from them in working with indigenous elders there is that they have a cosmology that puts life at the center, not humans. They, like one of the guys said to me, we think that we're related to the rocks and the grasses. And it reminded me of something that I had gone into the forest with E.O. Wilson, who's probably the greatest life scientist in the last 50 years, in Panama when we were working with Frank Gehry there. And Wilson said, there's really only one thing on the planet, it's life. Life is an experiment going in form, and we're one of those forms. And he said, rock is slow life, and life is fast rock. And that's really, all there is to it. And what I realized was that the scientists, the most advanced life scientists, and the indigenous cosmologists are taking us to the same place. That we have one idea coming from both directions. And so we really have finally a kind of understanding of life-centered design. And so what we did was really try to understand how do we actually codify that and allow people to do it. And that's what the MC24 principles are really all about, and why we're doing massive action, which is really to kind of make that accessible to as many people as possible. And that's really our collaboration. We're going to be doing as much as we possibly can over the next month to kind of try to understand how do we allow for people to have access to that and really get to scale, as Claire said. And so for me, the massive action idea is empowered people connected to opportunity for maximum impact. That's the, like if we could kind of put it in a nutshell, that's the ambition. So how do we, if you think about what designers do, you have the power to imagine the future. You have the power to control your life, to produce the future. That power, we take it for granted. We almost don't even realize we have it. And often we don't understand how powerful we are. We often use it, I think, for quite banal purposes, and even for even for things that are not even in our own interests. And so we began to think about, what could the impact of that be? So imagine UNSW producing 100 million designers demonstrating massive action. And when we kind of framed that idea, I mean, it's so audacious. We have no idea how to do that. It's kind of a crazy idea, just how big it is. But that's what we need to do. We need to get to an impact at that kind of scale, knowing that we don't know how to do it. But ultimately, if we're going to have the effect that we need to have on the time frame, in the time frame that we need to have it, we're going to need this kind of scale of impact. And I'm not suggesting that this is the only way that the final way we're going to frame our project. It's only a way of thinking about it. So that's really what massive action is about. It really kind of comes to life as a research and design experience project, as a global collaboration. It's really, we're working with people around the world to do this. The idea is to inspire audiences to actually participate and engage, and really develop a kind of new way of thinking about, how we do these things, and to kind of mobilize people around that. I have to say, we were absolutely blown away that we have already the Center for Massive Action here in Sydney. It's true to our experience in Australia that I don't think anyone in the world works as fast as you guys do. If you get excited, there's no stopping you. And so we're really thrilled to be here. This is what we'll be doing in the next month. We gave a really wonderful open day keynote, which is really fun, and so is this one. And we're going to do all these things over the next month. And we're going to focus, as Claire mentioned, on power, health, climate, and acceleration. We've already started to put together a catalog of innovative prototypes. Really, the first thing that we want to do is just look at what's going on out there. What are people already doing? So we're looking at 100 case studies and 10 design economies to give a kind of 1,000 proof points. What are people already doing that we don't have to do? So that's coming together in a pretty exciting way. So please join us. We're going to have a showcase of the work that we do on September 29th here at the Center for Massive Action. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got about 20 minutes, so we will be able to take questions in those 20 minutes. Have a bit of a conversation with Bruce and Beezy and yourselves, and I think we're going to put the house lights up in a minute, and then we've got Michaela and Nicole with roving microphones. If you have a question or a comment or a thought or an inspiration, please put your hand up.
We have one right here.
Michaela, just up.
Hey Michaela. Hi everyone. First, welcome to UNSW ABA. I'm so excited that you guys are here. But while I'm excited, I'm also worried. And sorry, negativity is an occupational hazard for academics, so I'll try and keep that in check. And I guess one of the things that worries me is the kind of optimism as a form of kind of toxic positivity. And I really love that you did recognize the role that, say, protest or those negative people that bring the problems often plays. But I guess, like most young people, I'm angry, I'm grieving for a planet in crisis, and just, looking for your advice. What do we do with all the negativity as well as the amazing opportunities?
So that toxic positivity thing? It is a thing, but we also have a principle which is fact-based optimism. So we're not Pollyannas. We don't bury our heads in the sand. But that saying, I turn that frown upside down to make a smile. So when we look at problems, we look at those as opportunities. And the other part of that is that we do need new narratives. The stories that we tell ourselves is the future that we produce. And so if you agree to all of the things that you see, the destruction that you can get on board with that, or you're like, I'm going to find solutions for that. And I'm going to find other people who find solutions to that. And I'm not going to have to do it by myself. So I'm going to build community, and so we can look at that together. And I think that you have the power to change your life, your world, and your community. And I think it's exercising that franchise in a positive fashion that will stop the greed, will stop the hurting. You realize that you actually have some agency. You don't have to accept things as they are. And I know it sounds one person among 7 billion, but if you actually look around, there are millions and millions, and possibly potentially billions of people who share your same sentiment. And part of our work is to make what seems invisible, visible. That's why there's massive action. You don't know, you look around, you read the newspaper, you would never know that there's a million great, amazing things that can make our lives and our world better. And so that's our project, is to make the invisible visible, show people proof points, or design things that are possible to actually design for the world that we'd like.
There's also, I think, what you're asking about is really a serious challenge in the work. In other words, I think there are a lot of things that kind of are framed as if they are good, and in fact they're just designed to be easy. For us, one of the big conversations that we had, and the reason that we did that we ended up in the conversation that we had with Claire and Carly and David and the team here, was we said, look, if we're going to fly to Australia, the impact of that has to be offset by something significant enough that wouldn't happen otherwise, that makes sense. We cannot come for a party. I mean, we'd love to have a party, of course. We love you guys, but it really has to be. We have to produce something of value that is, that is worth it. And there's a reckoning. There has to be a reckoning in the process. Like if you look at the LEEDs process, for instance, the LEED architectural standards. If we build what we need to build to house 2 billion people, and we do it with LEED standards, it's going to be an ecological disaster. We cannot allow that to happen. We need an entirely new way of thinking. So we need to go to an altogether different level. So it's not that LEEDs was a bad thing. LEED was a great thing. It's a good first step. But if we just check the box and go back to our, daily life, we will have failed our responsibility. My friend Sanford calls it a treason of the intellectual. In other words, that we would have really abandoned our responsibility as thinkers to do that. And I think that there's a lot of that going around these days. There's a lot of work that's being done in the name of solving problems. That is the most surface level work that is not actually coming anywhere close to what it's going to take to really change things and do what it takes to have a plausible future. And I think that it's, to me, really exciting that we can actually have that conversation and say, look, let's really go deep on and challenge everything that we're doing to say, is that going to be, is that going to get us there? That's why, like, the idea of going for 1 million or 100 million designers, like, the moment that you start to think like that, you have to change the paradigm, right? And you have to say, and it's something that we saw at ASU. I mean, ASU just announced that they're going to have 1 million students by the end of this decade.
100 million.
Oh, sorry, 100 million. 100 million students by the end of this decade. Now, that, like, you can't possibly bring them to Phoenix. It'll be too crowded. So we know that we're going to have to change the paradigm. And that means that, you have to open up the parameters. They don't know how they're going to do it. But once you make that kind of commitment and declaration, then you really start the serious design.
Thank you, Beezy. Thank you, Bruce. I'm looking for the next hand for a question, and it's
Okay.
Nicole. If you could go to Jess.
Welcome, and what a great way to start the week. Thank you. My question is, you talked about the success problems being the cause of, the great issues that we need to tackle, and a lot of those have come from us designing things that have made our lives easier and more convenient and, you know, better. How do you anticipate us needing to change our mindset to really be willing to make our lives more uncomfortable and less convenient in order to tackle those?
I don't think you can actually frame it in that way. I think you have to make it more beautiful, more exciting, more, refreshing, more delightful. It has to be conceptualized in a new way that isn't a negative. And I think one of the worst things that has happened to sustainability, which we've been working against for a decade, is that it's been framed in the negative. People think that sustainable is negative, that I'm going to have to give up something. Instead of saying, let's create a life that is richer, better, more beautiful. What if you had more time, more life, more energy, more experience? Like, now you might not have other things, but I think that our job as designers has to be to design that experience so compellingly that you're not saying, oh, rats, I don't have those other things. You're not kind of framing it in the negative. You're embracing the positive. And that's, that's not going to be easy, but I think that's the nature of the challenge.
But also, there are going to be a further 2 billion people coming on the planet in another 50 years. Are we designing a world where it's like, no, you can't have shoes, no, you can't have food, no, you can't have shelter? I mean, no. We're going to have to house and shelter those people as well as ourselves. And so what's a better, cooler, more sexier way to do that? How are we going to move? And I think as designers, we can reimagine that space. And I think you need to, well, it's a harsh word. If we can imagine, we have to figure out better materials, right? What can we do, what can we use that doesn't do any harm, right? So there's a reciprocity that's coming, and I think that for the younger generation, they just don't accept that things are unfair. And so that's up to us to actually build systems and ways of doing things that actually are more equitable, more inclusive, more life-giving, more life-affirming, and that's the design challenge, and I bet you everyone in this room is totally up for it, right? I mean, you just kind of are. And so I think about it like, we're not going to have less things. I think we'll have things that'll be more meaningful, more beautiful, that we'd actually care for, that are necessary, and less disposable, junky things that we don't really need. And I also think part of this design process is building real meaning and purpose in our lives and relationships. So some of those things that are filling some holes, maybe that won't be necessary, that we could actually have other activities besides, just shopping for stuff.
Thank you, BZ. Michaela, have you got a question up there? Thank you.
I have a few kind of comments. So in Australia, or what we call Australia, we actually call it country-centred design. And so we already have these kind of Indigenous ways of thinking, being and knowing in this country. So I guess one question that I have is, as an outsider coming to a place that you don't know, what is your position, and how do you think that you can kind of come here and design better than the Indigenous peoples and First Nation communities that we have here? And then second, I have to disagree with that idea that we don't have to sacrifice anything, because growth kind of is under this concept that we have unlimited resources, and we do have limited resources, so we do have to sacrifice in order to understand that we can't just consume endlessly, and that we need to kind of consider a better way of living and kind of consuming in order to kind of think about country, and I say country with a capital C, and thinking about how we can care for this place in a way that's not just purely about what I can have and own, Yeah.
So I just want to make clear that I wasn't talking about overconsumption. I mean, that's just not that's not the vibe. But what I am saying is that we do require energy. We'll do it differently. And I think that country, capital C, is a big deal. I mean, and I think I have enormous respect for country, big C. It's a sort of a weird thing. So in my journey, I am an African Caribbean Canadian. So I'm like colonial in all sorts of parts, right? And I have my family home in Nigeria, where I understand country and land. But I also understand First Nations rights in Canada, which is where I was born, and how we do that. And I think that designers have to come in with humility. I would never say that I would solve your country and country's problem, but I do think that with deep listening and respect, actually giving all voices, and that's why I think that people's understanding of the designed environment and how design actually empowers your life, which is our mission, which is to put design thinking tools in as many hands as possible, so that you actually have that awareness of country and space, you have that awareness of resources, you have awareness of people and your relationship to life as you navigate your space in the world with humility and reciprocity. And imagine, how do we all coexist? How do we all live? And how do we all flourish? I think it's important for me that all life flourish here as well, that we find that kind of balance where you can find your inner purpose and your joy, and where you can contribute and where you can be. So I welcome the question, but I think it's a tricky dance, and that's what we're here to really to solve and to look at. How do we coexist? How do we co-design? How do we respectfully look at place and our time, and then make room for 7 generations? I mean, I'm selfish in that regard, that everything I do is to make sure that other people can enjoy this beautiful planet that we have in perpetuity.
Thank you. Bruce, did you want to comment?
Also, we have had the beginning of, I think, what is a pretty extraordinary experience working with Dakota and the team here to really. Oh, there. Oh, hi, Sam. Okay. Okay, so that's so you know very well what we're, and for me that's really exciting. The learning through that process. It really was. I forget what it's called.
So we, Dakota and other First Nations students across the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture developed what we call our Cultural Reflexivity program, which is a program that was rolled out for all staff across the faculty, and Bruce and Beezy and Gretchen as well took part, or shared in the learnings of the Cultural Reflexivity program before coming to Sydney for this collaboration.
Yeah, so for me, the trying to understand, how to find a way to be, to kind of fit into the world is I think the challenge, and I don't think we have to. I mean, I agree that there are limitations that we have to begin to embrace, but I don't think that we have to frame it as sacrifice. That actually we have to change our mindset about how we think about that, because there is no limit to the. We are not impoverished in opportunity and energy, and the potential is not impoverished. We have applied a really impoverished imagination to what we've done with those possibilities. And we have distributed them radically unfairly. So you have, a very small number of people with, radically, it's hard to even contemplate the scale of wealth of a very small number of people, and the scale of poverty of a huge number of people. One of the books that we featured, and one of the people that we featured in Massive Change was a guy named C.K. Prahalad. And he wrote a book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And essentially he argued that almost all design, almost all, kind of thinking, strategy, all the kind of work that designers do, it's almost all focused on the top billion people. And the bottom 6 billion, when he wrote the book, now 7 billion, get almost nothing. And his argument was that when you start to actually focus on the bottom billions, you can really make huge impact, and you can revolutionize what you do for the top billion. You can really change it. And we have a friend at Rice University in Texas, and she took on a project to take a modern doctor's office, the functionality, all the kind of capacity of a modern doctor's office, and put it into a backpack for $200 off the grid. So you could take, her project was, I want to take everything you can do in a modern office, put it in a backpack so I can take it anywhere in the world off the grid. I don't want to need an expert, and I don't want it to cost a lot. I want it very cheap. And they've been working on that for a long time. They have this incredible studio there going. It's incredible what they're doing. They took, a $4,000 piece of equipment, and they made it for $100. They're going to make it for $10. They've taken all the kind of, any kind of expert person out of the system. It'll do they built the expertise into the piece of equipment itself. All that means is that you can take what is a very expensive system that currently draws huge amounts of capital and delivers it to a very exclusive group of people who are very wealthy and have access, and instead give it to everybody, basically make it accessible to everybody. And there's no reason that we can't think like that we can't actually make things differently and reconceive, all the things that we're doing. We have vast amounts of resources if we think differently about it. So it doesn't have to be conceived as sacrifice.
Bruce, thank you so much. Bruce, Beezy, thank you for your thoughts and your comments and that incredible, inspirational kick-off to launching Massive Action Sydney. I think that we are in for an exceptionally exciting month ahead of us, and as I said before, I'm really excited to see where it's going. Thank you to everybody here today for joining us, and to the 100 people who are joining us online as well. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Please, could you just join me in thanking Bruce and Beezy for their time this morning. Thank you. I have one little announcement to make, which is for all Massive Action Sydney participants in the room today, we've organised a bus to take you from here down to the Centre for Massive Action on the Paddington campus, and this will be departing from Gate 9 in two different shifts. There's one leaving at 11:15, and then it's going to come back and take a second group of people down at 12 o'clock. So please take advantage of that bus. And remember, everything kicks off down at the Centre for Massive Action at 1 o'clock. Get the bus down there, and remember to grab some lunch as well before we start. And when you arrive there, you will also be asked to register, get your onboarding packs, and so on. All right, thank you everybody for joining us this morning, and thanks again, Bruce and Beezy. Thank you.